Gentlemen, thank you ever so much. Jodey Arrington. So let me get this right. Phil Swaggle, who's the CBO director, now the guy's a Republican, okay? I don't know what he's doing. He's covering up the Biden inflation by using 2019 as a base instead of 2021. So I did some numbers, Jodey. You just hear me out. I'll be through in a second. The actual inflation rate under Biden annualized is 5.6% at an annual rate. Under Mr. Trump's 4 years, this is Biden 3 years and 1 quarter. Under Trump's entire administration, it was 1.9, okay? 1.9 Trump, 5.6 Biden. The second point I'll make is the level of the CPI through April, 19.9, okay, percent. It's actually 19.866. I'm only doing that because Art Laffer likes to do math and arithmetic. All right? So it's up almost 20%. Call it 20%. You know what? The entire Trump term, 4 years, the level of the CPI was up 7.7%. So it's 7.7 versus 20. All right? Couldn't be clearer. How can the CBO try to explain that away? How can Jared Bernstein, who is a friend of ours, for heaven's sakes, still propagate the lie that Biden inherited a 9% inflation rate, Jodey Arrington?
Well, no, they obviously had to borrow from Trump's economic successes to mitigate the profligate spending and the failed economic policies of President Biden and my Democrat colleagues. That's what they did. That's why they had to dip into the years where you had high wage growth, you had low inflation, you had a good economy, and then you just described the disastrous economy under this current president, where the American people are paying almost 20% more for the essential goods and services, $17,000 on average a year, which is why, Larry, and you know, all reports and studies and surveys aside, the American people in the Consumer Confidence Index show a lower confidence than we've seen since COVID, since all the shutdowns and the mandates and the depressed economy and society of COVID.
You know, thank you for that, Mr. Chairman Arrington. And Art Laffer, look, this business about Jared Bernstein is arguing now, and we heard it from the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, the conditions were set for high inflation. I mean, the conditions were set. There was a 1.4% year-on-year inflation rate in January 2021. And by the way, the COVID spending bills were going to run out. It was the so-called American Relief Act, whatever it was called, passed by the Democrats in March of 2021 that triggered the inflation. I mean, it almost started immediately after the spending going on. So, Arthur, again, I ask you, how can they make these arguments? And the public will see right through it, won't they?
Of course. You know, Larry, let me just add to what you said, which I think is really important, is there's not been one single month under Biden, inflation, the year-over-year inflation, not one single month that is lower than every single month of Trump.
Oh,
not one month were they lower than the... I mean, that's really powerful. The other thing is, and just for the record, this latest one that was quote-unquote not so hot, the reason it wasn't hot wasn't because of the one-month number. The one-month number was hot, but the number dropped off 12 months ago with very hotter, so it looked like the rate of inflation was dropping, but it wasn't dropping because of the current. It was dropping because of a lax. So next month you'll see a much smaller number dropped off, and my bet is you'll see a slight uptick in the rate of inflation then. And let me, if I can come to Jerry Willis as well. You know, 40,000 on the Dow. Wow, isn't that wonderful? But you know, if you inflation adjust the Dow, which you should do, the Dow has had an inflation increase since Biden took office of about 7,800 points. So the Dow in real terms is not as high as it was 3 years ago. So you know, these numbers have been really distilled and distorted because, and you know, I'm all for factual numbers and getting it right, even when it goes against our narrative. But this is really a true mistake. Biden's inflation numbers are really horrible, and the stock market is not as wonderful as people are saying it is.
That's an interesting point. In real terms, you're right. That's why, Arthur, only because of you, I went and got the CPI to the third decimal, 19.866 increase over
66,
over the since he was inaugurated. All right. Chairman.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you.
No, it's my great pleasure. Chairman Jodey Arrington, another point. This demand side of the economy has been relatively strong, largely because of government spending. I mean, we've chronicled that. We've been all through that on the show. But you know what? You look at some numbers today. One of the most important numbers, industrial production. And inside that number is manufacturing. Inside that number is also business equipment. That's how much business investment you're getting. Industrial production is the supply side of the economy, what businesses produce. So anyway, Jodey, it has been flat. This is the most extraordinary thing. You can see that chart. Production and manufacturing and business equipment has been essentially flat during the entire Biden years. And I got to think, you know, regulations have had an impact. The energy war against fossil fuels has had an impact. There's no business confidence in Mr. Biden at all. But it's remarkable. The production side of the economy, Jodey, hasn't moved in 3 years plus. That is some piece of work. What do you think about that?
Well, you've got to be really good and intentional about squeezing the supply side while you're flooding the demand side with federal monies. The supply side is squeezed by the things you just mentioned, and I would add to that, paying people who are capable of working not to work. So you combine the profligate spending with the squeeze on the supply side, and you get this inflationary firestorm, this cost of living crisis. So the hammer of high interest rates aren't going to be sufficient. You've got to rein in the spending, and you've got to provide the supply side relief that we saw during the Trump administration and Republican control in Congress. Lower taxes, lower regulation, have the incentives for people who are work capable to work. You do that, you bring the supply and demand into balance, and our best days are ahead of us, and certainly you'll see a tamp down on the inflation.
Jodey, just quickly, Budget Chairman, now, is there going to be a reconciliation bill for FY25 coming up, I don't know, September 30th or thereabouts? And I ask that because you've got trillions of dollars of obligated but unspent funds. You know about this. And the trick is to stop that spending and therefore the borrowing and the debt burden. You're going to have a reconciliation bill to stop any of this?
You better believe it. That is the tool that will be the Super Bowl to save the country from not only inflation, but a sovereign debt crisis that looms over the horizon. And you've got to get it mandatory spending. You've got to reform entitlements. And that's part of the utility of reconciliation that gives us the simple majority in the Senate. But it also will allow us to lock in the supply side relief with permanence on the tax cuts from the Trump era, among other things that will reignite growth. If we can grow by 1% over what CBO projects, Larry, that's $3 trillion over 10 years in deficit reduction. So it's a combination of the two.
Real quick. So, Arthur, you heard Chairman Jodey Arrington. He sounds like a supply sider to me. Arthur, why
he sounds great to me.
No, he's terrific. It's a blessing. Arthur, just real quick, 30 seconds. Why is production and manufacturing and business equipment flat? The levels has gone nowhere for 3 years plus, Art.
Because you really haven't seen good economics done here, Larry. You really haven't. The employment to population is no higher than it was prior to the pandemic. In fact, it's a lot lower. If you look at it, we don't have the investment because the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had an expensing of capital purchases in the first year. That was really powerful. We need to have a payroll tax cut and reinstate expensing on capital purchases, and we could send this economy to the moon. Yeah, and that will happen. It really will.
That's a great point. Because expensing has been phased down the last couple of years. You're exactly right. And so, therefore, people are not investing anymore. All right. Art Laffer, thank you. Mr. Chairman, Jodey Arrington, we appreciate it very, very much, sir.